welcome back to yet another video here on the Craft Beer Climbing channel, and today we're going to be talking about the history of IPAs. Now, I don't really know if there's any more iconic hipster beer than the IPA, and in fact, I'm willing to guarantee that a lot of you, when you think of craft beer, you're probably thinking about the IPA. Now, IPAs get a bad rep because everybody kind of attributes them to being bitter, resinous, pine tree tasting beers, but you'd be pretty surprised, as I was, when I started getting more and more into drinking IPAs and the different styles and versions and whatnot, as well as the different hop varieties that make up IPAs, just how different and wild the array of beers that you can drink are. So without further ado, let's get right on into this video. So to get right into it, the history of the IPA is a little bit befuddled or foggy and kind of shrouded in myth. If you've ever drank an IPA, or even if you've looked into it a little bit, the story you've probably heard has to do with the 18th century. Now, in the 18th century, England had a huge presence in India, and as a result, sailors going to India, it was a 6 to 8 month long sailing voyage as far as I know, beer would spoil on these ships that they were traveling on, and to counteract that, started aggressively hopping their beers, which would then prolong the life of the beer on these sailing voyages, thus giving the soldiers and colonists something to drink, because, 200 years ago, it was perfectly acceptable to drink on the job. Not only that, but while you're in India, it is a very hot climate country. You were now having these beers that were spoiling because at the time, again in the 18th century, porters were an extremely popular style of beer in the English nation. Spoiling beer with hot climate, dark beer, a lot of those things don't really go together, and so aggressively hopping the beer was then creating the India Pale Ale, and that is the story that most people seem to know when it comes to the history of the IPAs. All of that is false. The beers that were popular at that time were fairly stable. In fact, they were able to stay within the casks that they were typically shipped in for up to a year, and so the myth of them spoiling on the ship ride over to India was kind of false. So if we go back to the 18th century, we have a brewer by the name of George Hodson out of Bow Brewery in London, who is accredited with creating the October Ale. Now, this was a pale ale that actually became incredibly popular amongst the soldiers and colonists, not necessarily born to be exported exclusively to India because of the trip or the spoilage of beers or anything like that. It was just a beer that he created, was popular amongst the soldiers, because again, you go back to that time period, you have a huge love of porters and dark beers. Now here's something a little bit paler, crisper, more refreshing. This beer, this ale, this October Ale made by Bow Brewery, or developed, invented by George Hodson, was now very popular, and it became a major export to India. And in fact, the beer was labeled in the casks as Pale Ale for India. So even the name India Pale Ale didn't exist, doesn't really even come into existence until the mid to late 1900s. It was even labeled that these beers with added hops were absolutely necessary for hot climates, because again, it was a more refreshing, enjoyable beer to drink in India than, say, the English mild or English porter, whatever it may have been. So there's a lot of myth and kind of fallacies surrounding the whole IPA name, surrounding the invention, the creation, why it was there, but now you know. So without getting into too crazy of detail or going into every little variety of IPA there is in existence, we'll cover some of the most common ones, starting with your single IPA. Now, single IPAs can have an ABV typically up to about 6.5 to 7.5% alcohol by volume. Now, stepping away from the single IPA, you also have the double and triple IPA. A double IPA can also sometimes be called an Imperial Pale Ale or an Imperial IPA. And these ones can tend to have an alcohol by volume of 7.5 up to about 10% ABV. Below that, you're a single. Above that, you're a triple IPA. And again, just like the single IPA, you can have a double New England style IPA, a double West Coast IPA. The double more or less just refers to the alcohol by volume percentage of the beer itself. And then another step above the double, you have the triple IPA. The triple IPA is going to have an alcohol by volume above 10%. And you can even go beyond that. There's some breweries out there I've seen that do quadruple IPAs, which I've never actually tried, but sounds painful. Now, the hazy name is typically associated with New England style IPAs. New England style IPAs focus more on having the hop flavor come out, as well as having a low bitterness. And they tend to have a more smooth, creamy mouthfeel because of that hazy nature to them. Now, literally on the quite opposite spectrum and coast, you have the West Coast style IPA. These tend to have low malt. They focus more on having the bitterness of the hop come forward, as well as tending to have more of like that pine, resinous-y, grassy kind of flavor to them. So this is typically what you think of when you think of the IPA. I for sure was one of those people that thought that, you know, the IPA was a beer that smelled like a Sharpie, tasted like a pine branch, and just wasn't enjoyable. You really got to have an open mindset when it comes to drinking these kind of beer, because you will get those beers that you drink and you're just like, this tastes like a Sharpie. And then you'll have those ones that you drink that taste like some lemons and limes got together with a pineapple and a mango and had an orgy. So hopefully this video is somewhat useful to you guys and clarifies some of the misinformation out there in the world of IPAs. So as always, if you like this video, go ahead and click that like button, comment if you feel like commenting, subscribe, share the love. Make sure you also follow me on TikTok, Instagram, and Untappd at CraftBeerClimber across all those social media platforms. I do a little bit of everything throughout them. Again, thank you all so much. I hope you enjoyed this video. Cheers to all of you guys. Climb hard, crush cans, and repeat.